Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the Tenpenny Files. I'm your host, Dr. Sherri Tenpenny. The Tenpenny Files has a daily conversation meant to inform and educate, not just to entertain. I come prepared and let the discussion unfold naturally with people worth hearing and topics worth exploring. If it matters to you and your body, your freedom, and your future, we talk about it here. Each day, I talk with authors, documentary filmmakers, and independent thinkers whose work challenges mainstream messaging. We cover a wide range of topics from government and politics to history to astronomy, pets and travel to food, farming and fitness to vaccines, health and health policy. We also have a weekly conversation with authors and pastors who write about faith and biblical principles. The goal is to introduce you to topics that you've never heard of before and to topics that you wish you'd had more time to dig into and explore. And we hope that these will provide resources for a place where you will know where to get started. If this sounds interesting, please join us here every day at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, at the Tenpenny Files, where we will hear from voices who have been ignored, censored, and silenced, but truly have something important to say. But before we begin today, I want to invite all of you to become a Tenpenny Prime member. Prime members receive an exclusive monthly white paper, a recorded PowerPoint presentation that you can listen to at your leisure, and also access to a monthly Ask the Expert masterclass, where I bring you really top experts where we can do an open forum question and answer period of time. They have been every month. They've just been terrific. If you want to learn more and hopefully join us to support our work, go to primembership.drtenpenny.com to learn more and get started. So with that, let me introduce to you today's guest for our conversation today is the visionary author, researcher, and strategic thought leader in health, technology, and innovation, Marc Girardot, who's to talk about his book, The Needle's Secret, The Bolus Theory Revolution, a pioneering investigation that reveals critical flaws in vaccination and why vaccines harm some but not others. Marc, welcome so much to the Tenpenny Files. Thank you for joining me here today.
Thank you for having me again.
So you have used your extensive history to formulate a new theory on vaccine injury. Can you restate what the bolus theory is? I know we had you on your show before, but this is a new platform and a whole new audience. So it's a whole different group of people. So restate what the bolus theory is in the simplest forms and what happens during an intramuscular injection.
Let me try and shock everybody. Everybody's scared of snakes. And snakes, why are we scared of snakes? We're scared of snakes because when they bite us, when they inject us with poison in the muscle, we often die. But I don't want to be too sarcastic here, but frankly, what's the difference between a snake injecting poison into the deltoid and a doctor injecting a vaccine, which is poison, into the deltoid? Is the poison isn't the poison staying in the muscle like doctors tell us? They don't. We've known that for millennials, since the dawn of time. We've always known that snakes, when they bite you, the dose of poison can go intravenous. It can go directly to the heart, it can go to the lungs, it can go to the brain. And so the bolus theory really builds on that. I've worked through the vaccine injured and the autopsies and the observations of many researchers to try and understand why some people were harmed and why some people weren't. Why did some people have cancer and why did people not get cancer when they were injected with these vaccines? And what I've discovered through a robust and very thorough root cause analysis, I've discovered that it's because the delivery technique is different. The delivery technique is flawed. And So let me try and tell your audience how it's flawed and what happens when you get injected. The first thing that doctors seem to be ignoring now is the fact that when you insert a needle into the muscle, you're going to cut through capillaries and vessels and blood vessels, quite a few of them. In my recent simulation, I've calculated about 5,000 of them within a 1-inch needle. Now, when you inject a product into a sealed environment like the muscle, and that you've opened up an exit with low pressure into those capillaries, naturally, the venom or the vaccine is going to flow directly through those capillaries into your blood circulation, and it's going to go to your heart. Your right chamber is going to go through your lungs. It's going to then go back to the left chambers of your heart, always cross the aorta and the large arteries, and be disseminated throughout the organs and the systems. And that's really a problem, because what it is, it's a Russian roulette. Sometimes sometimes part of the dose is going to be completely disseminated and nothing's going to happen. Sometimes it's going to be concentrated and it's going to hit and carpet bomb that area and tell your immune system to destroy the entire area. And depending on how intense the hits are, how repeated the hits are, you're going to have more severity or less severity. Now, what is truly still mind-boggling to me is that I've been talking about this for about 4 years now, and the public health authorities have been ignoring it, when the reality of it is that it's very simple. The reality of it is we're using an antiquated delivery technique from the Dark Ages. Injecting a vaccine, or supposedly high technology, into human beings and industrializing it with a technique that it's not standardized, because every single injection could be different. Every muscle, every deltoid is different. Every injector is different. You can have different speeds, and we'll see later that speed is extremely important. So it's not standardized. It's not calibrated, but because it goes to, some get more of it in different places. It's not root compliant, which is extremely important and was discussed at ACIP in September. What is the biodistribution of these nanoparticles, the vaccine? Why is the vaccine going to the heart? Why is it going to the brain? Well, guess what? Yeah, it's 50%, according to my latest simulation, at least 50%, which actually also matches the test on the mice, goes IV within an hour. So it's not compliant, and it's not on the route side, and it's not compliant on the destination side. It's supposed to target muscle cells and stay there. It doesn't. It actually hits mostly endothelial cells, which is the wall linings of your blood vessels, of your circulatory system, as well as occasionally stem cells, and that's a very, very big deal. Now, the last point I want to make on in this introduction is this is easy to fix. Right? This is easy to fix for all vaccines and many injectables. And the other point that I want to make is this delivery problem is not limited to COVID vaccines or to vaccines in general. It applies to all the injectables with different severities, but still it's a massive problem, and we've been doing that wrong for over a century, and we've harmed billions. This is the most catastrophic medical malpractice in the history of the world. And we've probably hurt, maimed, and killed more people with this technique than any other things in the history of mankind. Can't hear you.
That's really a big statement. It really is. Would this also apply to like injectable penicillin and injectable vitamin D and things like that? Are you specifically limiting it to like liquid solutions like vaccines?
No, it's not limited. It has different severities. Vaccines are extremely dangerous and toxic because every single particle, either it's LNPs or various virus-like particles, keep their cytotoxic potential, and so they don't dilute as much as other sometimes proteins or toxins, which do. Nonetheless, even saline injected intravenously can be dangerous. So it's just a question of what I call the magnifying glass effect. Is anything concentrated can be harmful. And so if you inject vitamins or anesthetics or steroids, or epinephrine, and it gets to an area that's not supposed to in a concentrated way, it'll do damage. It'll kill cells, or it'll trigger a domino that's not supposed to be triggered. So that's why snakes evolved with this technique to actually try to catch a prey, is bypassing nature's defenses against poison. And that's what
you recently set up a simulation on intramuscular injections to help clearly not only to study this, but to clearly make it identifiable to show other people like me and the lay public. Can you explain what you did and what these models have shown?
Sure. I did what is called a Monte Carlo simulation, which is like throwing dice. And I did that in total 15,000 times, but I did 10,000 times the first 8 minutes, which is what I call the expansion bolus, which is the most dangerous part, is when you inject and you push on the plunger, how much of the dose goes directly intravenously during that first expansion of the dose. It was extremely, of course, it's only a simulation, it's not reality, but what's interesting when you do a simulation is and you calibrate it well, and what I did is I calibrated all the way through at each steps with real data, with real observations, so I know I'm not too far off in terms of orders of magnitude. So there's a few things that were interesting. The first point that was very interesting is it forces you to think through what's happening. And one of the things that I had missed out was how the bolus would be actually broken down in small boluses, as micro boluses at each heartbeat. So basically, you have a flow of liquid. Each heartbeat cuts it off into a block, and then this block is sent to the lungs, and by going through the capillaries, it's split again. So in my simulation, on average, I think about 230,000 microboluses are sent off. It's an estimation from the left ventricles into the body. Catapulted, right, and each time crossing the aorta and the large arteries, which is severely hit. That's another thing that I've really come to realize is there's a huge difference between the central path of the aorta and the large arteries, because everything that leaks goes through there. right? It's only 1 or 2 meters long. After that, it's all sent out and disseminated through, I don't know how many thousands of kilometers of capillaries. So it's a bit, which actually helped me understand something I couldn't get wrap my head around. And it was the difference between white clots, which show massive damage to the endothelium and to vascular systems, so really long and millions of cells that are destroyed. And what was found in this book, and notably in all the autopsies, which are extremely small damage in the organs. And so that was for me very eye-opening, because the first victim of the vaccines in terms of organ is actually the cardiovascular, because it is hit every time. And in my simulation, in the first 8 minutes, in the first hour, there's about 4 million hits, which is compared to the 10 billion nanoparticles. That seems like relatively small, but that's a huge amount of cells destroyed in a central area, which means that it explains why so many Americans have atherosclerosis, because we're harming them systematically, always there. I mean, some people are hit, everybody's hit about a bit everywhere, but after that, it's really something more of a Russian roulette, right? Sometimes you're hit more in the brain and you get Alzheimer's. Sometimes you're hit in the gut and you have something else. But here, everybody's going to get harmed. The last thing I learned from this simulation is the huge discrepancy the speed of injection makes. So if you inject very quickly, you're going to send 14% of the dose, according to my simulation, within 8 minutes. That's 1.4 billion nanoparticles. That's huge. That's huge. If you do it slowly, you're going to let the dose expand slowly into the muscle, and you're just going to send 300 million, which is 5 times less. And that's a world of difference. It seems, it's a bit, I know it's a bit technical and boring, but it's a make or break. The difference, it's crazy how just a simple detail of you having a nurse injecting you slowly or fast, which is seemingly mundane, but it's not. It can be life-changing.
Wow. You've considered this to be a root cause of a lot of conditions, that it really is something, particularly when you think about, we start injecting babies at birth, and we give them like up to 48 vaccines by the time they're 6 months of age, and over 60, I believe the count is, by the time they start kindergarten. And you consider this like a root cause that can cause a whole bunch of different types of diseases. How can you answer that scientifically with a robust explanation of how it can cause so many different types of pathologies?
It's a question of which domino is kicked off. Okay, so a lot of the I just said too something which is very important. Depending on where you're at, you're going to have extremely intense hits in the aorta, in the large arteries, or disseminated hits, and maybe some hits sometimes a bit. So there's the first area that has something which is extremely special, which is longitudinal harm around in the arteries. We've never evolved for that. We've never evolved. Typically when you get bitten by a snake, you die. You don't evolve for that. So here, depending on a variety of scenarios, what's driving is the repair is abnormal. Since we've never evolved for that, you're going to have too much repair going, upstream, or not enough downstream, and that's going to justify many things, notably thrombosis, but is also going to, for example, create fistula. Fistula is simply that you have too much growth factor, revascularization factor upstream, because you've had such a huge wound, but it's longitudinal. So when the repair comes, it's a bit like you're focusing all the ambulance at the last cars of the crash that have crashed. You have 100 cars crashed. Well, you're going to send all the ambulance, and they're just going to take the last car that crashed, or the last few cars, but they're not going to take care of the first people who crashed, because they won't be able to access it. So that's already, that explains calcification, that explains thrombosis, that explains thrombocytopenia, that explains aneurysms, white clots, and all of that. But then after that, there's damage. You're sending 200,000 of those. That's for the Pfizer vaccine. In my estimation, over 200,000 microboluses. And 5% of those are going to go to the brain, and 5% of those are going to go to the heart, 15% are going to go to the brain. Then it's a roulette. It's going to hit everywhere, and clearly, the data shows that everybody's hearts had leaky capillaries, which means everybody's hearts have been hit. But some people are hit more, and some people are also have difficulty repairing. In this dynamics, there is the damage, and then the capacity for the body to repair or not to repair in time or in space. So that's why some people are hit in the brain, sometimes in the gut, but it's the same fundamentals in the gut or in the organs. You're going to have either thrombosis or microthrombosis is going to kill off the cells, because once you do a thrombosis, you're blocking off the blood flow. And because you're blocking off the blood flow, you're depleting the cells of oxygen, of energy and nutrients, and they die. So wherever that's going to happen, and depending on how wide the damage is, you're going to kill part of the function or the total function. And if it's your heart, you're dead, of course. But if it's your pancreas, it's gonna, you're gonna have insulin issues. You can have type 1 diabetes, or kidney failure if it's in the kidneys. You can also have a different type of damage, which is you've only, if I could say only, the T cells, the immune system has destroyed the lining, but in the capillaries. And here, that's a big problem, because that lining in the capillaries is the blood tissue barrier. It plays a fundamental role in all the organs. It's different and distinct in each organ, as it filters some elements that are required for that organ in particular. Sometimes it's tighter in the brain, for example. It's extremely tight in the testis. It's extremely tight to avoid inflammation in the brain, for example. And so when you break down that blood tissue barrier, two things are going to happen. You're going to let in elements in the blood that by definition are toxic because they're not filtered, right? If we were granted a barrier it was to stop things in the blood from entering. And if you have elements that enter a tissue that are foreign, your immune system is going to react. it's going to create inflammation. It's going to try to clean up the mess. And that's what people call an autoimmune disease. An autoimmune disease is not your immune system going haywire or doing anything wrong. It's because it's reacting to elements in your tissue that are not supposed to be there. So the problem with that is, and depending on where that leak is, you're going to have, arthritis, joint pain, or you're going to have leaky gut if it's in the gut, or you're going to have Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and all of these if it's in the brain. Now, you're not only going to have inflammation, but another domino is, depending on the area, you're going to have degeneration, especially in areas where stem cells are not very present. Then you're going to have, notably in the nerves, or in the brain, in the heart. Then this inflammation over time is going to build up degeneration, and you're going to, again, have necrosis. You're going to kill off cells, but that's going to be extremely progressively, just like in some neuropathies or ALS or Alzheimer's and other. Now, there's a last, if you open a door, you have a leak in, but you also have a leak out.
Marc, hold that thought right there. We need to take a hard break for our sponsors right there. So we're talking about the front door leaking and the back door leaking, and we'll circle back around to that after our break here. But we need to take a short break to hear from our sponsors at AmericaOutloud.news. America Out Loud Talk Radio plays the Tenpenny Files on the iHeartRadio network daily at Monday through Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern. You can also listen anywhere in the world by going to AmericaOutloud.news and listen through their media player, not only the Tenpenny Files, but other great speakers and podcasters that are on that platform. If you've missed any of our great conversations, you can find the Tenpenny Files on Spotify, Pandora, Apple, TuneIn, the iHeart Virtual Studios, and on my platforms, drtenpenny.com, drtenpenny.substack.com, and we also play them on Rumble, X, and Instagram. Please follow me on X and Instagram at BusyDrT. There are so many great books out there and so many really good documentaries with so little time in our very busy lives to read and to watch. This show is meant to maximize your time and jumpstart your interests and give you a place to follow up on interesting topics that you go, I really think I'd like to learn more about that. Well, we are bringing you the people that you should follow to get more information. We have a great message coming up from our sponsors. They're the ones that keep America Out Loud afloat and us. So sit tight. We'll be right back with more from Marc Girardot to talk about his book, The Needle's Secret, The Bolus Theory Revolution. We will be right back. Zeolite is a detox spray. We work specifically with a company called Touchstone Essentials. They are an incredible company. We've been working with them now for several years. And zeolite is a mineral that goes through your body like a one-way basket. It will clean out heavy metals such as arsenic and mercury, aluminum, cadmium, and it hooks onto those metals from a one-way perspective. So once it's bound, it goes out through your urine or your stools and doesn't get redeposited in other places. Everybody needs to have a detox product in their life, and this one is so easy to use and it's so safe. You can take it when you're pregnant, you can take it when you're nursing, you can give it to little children, you can even give it to infants, and quite frankly, I give it to my dog. I actually put a little bit of the zeolite in his water because until we all stop living in a toxic world, we all need to get some of those extra toxicities out, the heavy metals, the persistent organic pollutants, the things that are floating through the air, the different things that we come in touch with in our environment. And we are a big fan of zeolite from Touchstone Essentials. We've been a big fan of their products for several years. Go to drtenpenny.com/detox to get your first bottle of zeolite spray for $50 off.
Well, only when the government bows to the people will America become great again. This is Malcolm Out Loud here. Join me in pushing back against censorship, my fellow Americans. Right at the top of AmericaOutloud.news are the words, many voices, one freedom, united in the First Amendment. Now is our time, my fellow Americans. That's AmericaOutloud.news. Liberty and justice for all.
Well, welcome back, everyone. Today's conversation is with Marc Girardot to talk about his book, The Needle Secret and the Bolus Theory Revolution, a pioneering investigation that reveals a critical flaw in vaccination and why vaccines harm some and not others. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about Marc, and when you understand a little bit about his background, it will make more sense of the way that he has come together with this great theory and put it all together in one package for us. Marc is an expert in strategy and innovation with a career spanning industry, information technology, and the automotive sector. He has served on business advisors as a business advisor to global companies and startups, including those in the biotech sector. Having become a whistleblower during the pandemic, he has penned more than 100 articles, earning him the Best of 2021 award from Biz News. He also has a Substack with more than 25,000 followers and subscribers and more than 2 million views. So his background and analytics allowed him to be able to put all of these pieces together in a way that no one has before. The Needle Secret is the result of over 10,000 hours of volunteer research. So Marc, welcome back to the show. We're glad that you could use that brilliant mind of yours and all the different innovations that you've studied and learned to apply them towards this really important concept of injection injury. Before the break, you were talking about leaky gut syndrome and all the different things that kind of like knock open the door. You have a front door and a back door. So staying with that concept, how does the bolus theory apply to something like type 2 diabetes and other types of cardiovascular disease?
In the case of type 2 diabetes, it's an interesting illness because it's both the leak in and the leak out. First, let's talk about the leak out. So if you have a leak in the pancreas, in the blood tissue barrier there, it's a physical leak. Okay, it's disappeared. The T cells have destroyed that lining, and it's not doing it's not playing its role of filtration in and regulation out. So it's not regulating insulin anymore, and therefore every element of insulin, every molecule of insulin that's produced by the beta cell is released into the bloodstream. Now, again, in the Bolus theory, for each problem, there's a different domino, right? And so if you have too much insulin into the bloodstream, your body's going to react, and of course your cells are going to lose out their receptors. And what is that going to be called? It's going to be called insulin resistance. Not really insulin resistance. It's your body's adapting to the fact that you're overproducing insulin. So that's the leak out. But at the same time, you're going to have an autoimmune disease because you're going to have leak in of elements that don't belong into the beta cells, and you're going to have inflammation. The immune system is going to react and try to clean the mess that's coming in every time you eat stuff, and that some of the elements start circulating to your bloodstream. But since they're not filtered by that endothelium layer anymore, they're entering and they're creating chaos. And as I said earlier, the same phenomenon of degeneration is going to happen. In the end, you will end up with losing those beta cells and becoming, basically type 1 diabetes. So it's what's really interesting about the Bolus theory is you have one first domino, and then it can kickstart other dominoes, and then you have different areas, different products or different contexts, and different contributing factors that make up the extreme variety of those illnesses. But there is a common ground. There's common ground.
Well, what would that be? What is
Well, the common ground is those ways to harm your bodies, because fundamentally, you know, this is testing the limits of our body's capacities. That's what it shows. It shows that whether it's venom, whether it's a vaccine, whether it's another injectable, the results are the same. Is you've poisoned the body in a certain way, and your body wasn't capable of fixing that damage.
Well, you know, Mark, thankfully, not every single injection causes permanent illness or causes a long list of things like diabetes and heart disease. Not every shot that somebody gets makes them severely ill. But what are the factors that drive severity?
Well, there's different elements. The first element is on the injection itself, how fast it's injected, how big it is, and where it lands. There's a wide variety of, should I say, topology. In my book, I use an analogy in modern painting, going from Soulages, the French painter that painted everything black, which was basically what happens with the white clots. Is you've transfected or you've infected entirely every single cell in the arteries and destroyed them. And sometimes it's going to be Jackson Pollock and you're going to have 1,000 cuts. And sometimes it's going to be very small dots. But so there's that, how it lands, how big it lands. There's where it lands, because some organs are more sensitive than others. Of course, the brain and the heart and the liver and the kidneys are, life critical organs. Some organs are if you hit a muscle, it can be painful. If you hit a joint, it could be life changing, but it's not going to kill you. So the sensitivity of where it lands makes a difference. But also there's an element of scale. So harm is always about scale. You can have scale because you can have scale because you have a little leak of blood, and over 10 days or 2 weeks, you're just going to bleed out without knowing it, like it almost happened to my best friend. So, or you can have scale because you've completely you've damaged so many endothelium cells that you're triggered a huge coagulation cascade. I mean, it was interesting. I read last week that platelets are used about 100,000 platelets per square millimeters. And so when you look at thrombocytopenia, you can do the calculation of how many platelets actually got used to try and calculate the damage of people. And it's colossal. We're talking, square feet of endothelial damage. So the scale, that's what we're talking about. There's another element of scale is if you contaminate cells that can themselves scale, and those are stem cells. Stem cells are the closest thing to what your parents or our parents created us, and there are genetic matrix, and they can scale. I mean, some multipotent can scale extraordinarily. If you contaminate them, then they will be able to create considerable damage because they will scale the damage. And that's the definition of cancer. And I can go into more details if you want me to explain my new cancer theory. But it's very clear. These are the elements of severity.
You also have a really interesting theory about obesity. That's different than the way most think about obesity. Tell us about that one.
Oh, that's, I should take my joker here on this one, Sherri. I know I'm going to take a lot of flack. Look, I think evidently obesity is related to how much you eat, okay? So nobody's discounting that. But I do think that, first of all, having lived in the US in the 70s, I don't think the food was any worse than any better than it is today. Right? There are no Diet Cokes at the time. There are no organic food. So I'm not so sure, 50 years ago, if the U.S. population ate much better than they do today. I would challenge that assumption. So I also think that people think that you ingest, what you ingest is necessarily integrated into your body, but your intestines are not your body. They're not inside your body. They're actually outside your body. There's a lining, right? And your body, our bodies are extremely well, designed. Whether it's God who designed it very, very well. And it's not because you overeat that it's going to take everything, right? It's going to select on the chain. It's going to select what it needs, and it has limited capacity to intake. It's not going to take everything because it needs to process it, and notably fat. Fat needs to be processed, and it needs to be integrated very slowly via the lymphatic system. Now, here's my assumption, and it's a conjecture, I admit, but I find it very intriguing, and I think interesting. If you have leaky gut, right? It's a physical leak, okay? So again, leak in, leak out. Leak out, you're gonna lose out some of your blood elements. You're gonna have immune cells that are in contact with some of your biome, and it's gonna create inflammation. Okay, so that explains very well why people who have leaky gut have inflammation. It makes complete sense. But you're also going to have leak in. And in the leak in, there are two things that I immediately, or three things. One, you're going to have gluten before it's actually processed, if it's early in your intestines. So that explains, gluten intolerance, because you're not supposed to integrate into your bloodstream gluten in its real natural form. You're also going to have bacteria, right? And that explains why people who have leaky guts have many infections, and the risk of sepsis. But the last point is also interesting: is what about fats? What would stop fat from entering? Nothing. And if fat enters in its processed form or its unprocessed form, especially, that explains ectopic fat. And of course, if you live, in Silicon Valley and your mom is extremely into, vegan food or extremely balanced food, well, you might have leaky gut. You might have some inflammation, but fundamentally, you're not going to get too much fat, over fat, right? But if your mom is struggling and feeds you junk, then the fat is going to accumulate, or if you have bad habits, it's going to accumulate. So what I'm trying to say is, I think that explains the obesity crisis in the United States, and the growing also in the rest of the world. It's to a certain extent, it is partly the responsibility of the people because that's what they eat, but it's somewhat unfair because they're damaged and their body doesn't have the capacity to restrict the fat they're intaking. And I think that's something worth looking into. By the way, when I wrote my last article on obesity, I found a very intriguing research, German research, that had put ultra obese people who were suffering from leaky gut, and they put them on a low calorie diet, and after 3 months, they're no longer leaky guts, and immediately their weight started to drop very considerably, because naturally, of course, the body then can actually manage, but there's no way the body can manage extra fat coming in and not being processed. So that's my take on obesity.
That's interesting. Well, it's something very different. And again, your theories are both very different, but very plausible and things that require more in-depth study. We're coming down to just the last few minutes of our show and our time here today. But according to your research, which protocols are showing the most promising for reversing bolus-induced damage from particularly vaccines? There's a lot of damage from the COVID jab, but from any other type of, children that are damaged from all of the other vaccines. What is the most promising protocols? We've only got a couple of minutes left, so
I'm going to be quick. Well, if it's endothelium damage, if it's atherosclerosis, the most promising are the fibrinolytics, so nattokinase, and all of that. Even though there are precautions to take, because those are going to dissolve the clots, the fibrin, and sometimes there are issues because there's a reason why there's coagulation. So if people want to look into that, they can go to my Substack. I talk about that. So that's for this. For most of the leaky vascular system, the capillaries, all the autoimmune diseases, neurodegeneration disease, endocrine disorder, oxygen therapy, hyperbaric or normal baric, so just with an oxygen concentrator, as well as all the techniques that are going to stimulate your stem cells. And you can stimulate your stem cells in a variety of areas. The oxygen is stimulating all your stem cells. Then you have stem cells in your feet. That's why walking is so great. Walking with great shoes, with comfy shoes, so you don't damage your feet, but you stimulate stem cells. And there's many people who are, proposing cayenne pepper in the feet, etc. There's a tremendous, what's the right term? Capital of stem cells in the feet. There's tremendous capital of stem cells in the gut. So here, ivermectin, those are, and many other elements, coffee, green tea, all these things that people have been taking for many years, or fasting. Actually, fasting is probably the most powerful one there. And in terms of cancer, because my theory is that you contaminate stem cells. Well, all the therapies that are going to trigger stem cell differentiation so that your immune system can attack them. So oxygen can help, but also all the antiparasitics, so ivermectin again, fenbendazole, etc. So those are very quickly the three areas.
How would hyperbaric help the most?
Hyperbaric can help the most. You mean in which illness?
And just overall healing in your protocols. You mentioned oxygen and oxygen therapies and hyperbaric and normal baric.
Yeah.
What does the oxygen do to that?
The oxygen is actually the way you stimulate your stem cells. Okay, for example, when your skin starts to erode, right? Oxygen penetrates and triggers keratinocyte stem cells so that they start building again. So it's when you play sports, it's healthy because you're over oxygenating. So it does three things. It's going to stimulate stem cells that are going to be helpful for revascularization. That's why the FDA approves it in the case of radiotherapy. So if there's necrosis for who cares if it's for radiotherapy or something else? it's going to work. So it works for necrosis, necrosed tissue. Very important. It's going to trigger stem cells, endothelial stem cells. So it's going to repair those capillaries, those blood tissue barriers that are leaky. So it's going to stop and correct Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, ALS, all these illnesses that are supposedly incurable. So it's going to do that. It's going to, that's a hypothesis, it's conjecture, but I've seen it work on a friend of mine who had cancer, and she improved very, very quickly with oxygen. It's going to differentiate tumors. And by differentiating tumors, those are going to start expressing things that the immune system are not going to last, and so they're going to be attacked. So that's, in my opinion, extremely promising. And it's also going to stimulate your immune system, which is extremely important.
So Marc, we've got like 1.5 minutes left here. So I want you to tell people, where is the best place that people can go to buy The Needle's Secret, the Bolus Theory Revolution, and then tell them where your Substacks are, because you've written voluminously, and where can people learn more about this topic and to follow?
Okay, so my Substack is called the Bolus Theory series. So you can go to my profile on X and find it there. But normally, if you look at it, if Google doesn't shadow bans me too much, I should be accessible. So yeah, there's a lot of content there on different problems, different illnesses. My book is accessible, available on Amazon in English, in French, and Spanish.
Oh, very good. Very, very good. So that people can read it from all over the world. Well,
Yeah.
I want to thank you so much for your work and bringing these interesting topics that deserve further investigation, because it could answer a lot of health problems for a lot of different people. So thank you so much for joining me here today and talking about this in detail. And I want to thank all of our listeners and viewers who have been here with us today to listen to this very interesting and unique topic, the Bolus Theory. Go out and get the book. Go out and read it, because when you read it, there's lots of diagrams and pictures in the book that may help you to understand it and explain it a little bit more detail. So with that, I want to thank everybody for being here. I want to close out with one of my favorite verses from the Bible. I close every one of my podcasts with, whether they are live or pre-recorded, which is Romans 12:12. Rejoice in hope, be patient in trouble, and be persistent in prayer. We'll see you again here tomorrow on AmericaOutloud.news and iHeartRadio. We'll see you over there on my platforms at drtenpenny.com, drtenpenny.substack.com, and also on X and Instagram at Busy Dr. T. So we'll see you again tomorrow or the next time on the Tenpenny Files. Have a good rest of your day, everyone. Goodbye and God bless.